Welcome to Slator Pod, episode number 27. Hello from Zurich.
Hi from London.
27. Actually, there's nothing. Is there anything particular with the number 27? I just listened to another podcast and the guy made up, I think it was episode 15, and he like rambled on for like 1 minute around what the number 15 means. 27, yeah. Not so much.
Nothing springs to mind. I don't know.
Maybe I'm sure the rock stars that died when they were 27.
Oh, that's very depressing, but
that's very accurate. Depressing. So is that okay? Let's not go there. It's too depressing. This is a business podcast. Let's stay on message. 27, great for us. Just past half year mark, so that's good. So housekeeping. We're trying to improve further the presentation of this on YouTube, but as we found out last week, it takes about 4 hours to render. So we'll try to shorten this a little bit. Internal podcast talk. I'm so sorry. So this morning I had a great webinar. I had a webinar with my good friend from Apptek, Manuel Stöckel, and we had a German language webinar. So it was great sitting in front of a screen and actually speaking German. It's an interesting experience, especially all these business terms and like AI terms. Some of them actually haven't really been translated yet. So it's kind of ironic.
Did you find a term for cloud dubbing in the end?
No. Oh. No, I left the cloud. The dubbing. There's a proper translation for cloud. I honestly don't know what dubbing as cloud would be in German. Anyway, great webinar. It was really fun with my good friend who also lives here in Zurich, and so that was interesting. Then we had a Slator webinar yesterday, design thinking, also very well attended, and hopefully everybody who dialed in liked it. And then, of course, we're coming up on SlatorCon Remote in 2 weeks' time, in July 9th. So in exactly 2 weeks, we're going to have SlatorCon Remote, lots and lots of registrations. But of course, since this is virtual, we can just, there's no cap. I just had to upgrade GoToWebinar. So, let's see how far this takes us. I mean, the cap on, I think the other subscription would be like 5,000. So I doubt we're going to max it out.
Probably not. No.
Probably not. On the agenda today, first we're going to talk about Apple Translate. We're going to talk about a company called Localized with an S. And we're going to talk about SOSi, government contractor, and Apptek. Then moving again to Japan with a company called Takara. And finally moving back to London with Deliveroo. I noticed they're from London when we did the show notes and researched.
Yeah. For
some reason, I thought they were from Germany, but
not this time.
They're from London. Okay, Apple Translate. We're following that worldwide developer conference a little bit. Sometimes, they're announcing interesting things. And indeed, this time they announced that they were going to launch a built-in translate app, and that they're going to expand this. Apparently, they're going to expand this translation feature throughout like the Apple ecosystem. But what we're talking about today is the iPhone Translate app. Mm-hmm. And so just tell us a little bit about it's local, right? It's not connected to the internet. It also works locally.
Yeah, as far as I understand it, you don't actually have to be connected.
Yeah. And it's neural on the iPhone, and it says without an internet connection, so it wouldn't send any data to Apple, which is interesting. Bonus. And then before the show, we were researching a little bit. This may actually be a bigger deal than kind of just an app on your iPhone, because obviously there's like 1 million apps you can download on the iPhone, but this seems to come pre-installed. So there's not too many apps that are pre-installed. How many are there?
Well, I think we had a bit of a debate about that, but I mean, all in all, I think there's about 40 or so. If you include things like the camera, your contacts and things like that, there's about 40, but then I think, there's about 10 or more that you can actually delete and get rid of. So probably 20 kind of core apps, I'd say, that come pre-installed.
Yeah, and there's like most iPhone users, they have like this Apple folder where they just put all the stuff in they would never use, like the stocks. Yeah. The stocks app.
The stocks one,
Who's using the stock apps? I don't. Anyway, so long short, if Apple actually launches a Translate app as a pre-installed app on every iPhone with the new iOS 14, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. I mean, so there's 20 apps people get pre-installed mostly, or 40, and one of them would be a Translate app. That's a big deal. Yeah. So my thought bubble there was, well, what does it mean for all these other translation apps that are that we've discussed many times before, that are on the iPhone or on the iOS ecosystem, especially, for example, iTranslate. This was actually one of the few successful exits in the language tech industry. So it was an Austrian-based startup that developed iTranslate literally like around 2009. I mean, very early on when the iPhone came out. It was one of the first generation of apps. And then they sold it in 2017 to a company called IAC Applications. They also own like Tinder, OkCupid, Vimeo, Dictionary.com. So they bought it. And according to press reports, it was in the high double digit, low triple digit millions. So, 90 or whatever, $150 million. So quite a good exit. It's number 21 in productivity, so it's still very much in use. Got 4.7 out of 5 ratings, like 360,000 ratings
on the App Store, or
yeah, on the App Store. Now again, we're talking about the iTranslate app, right? Which has like 100 languages, 80 million downloads. And another interesting fact is that we actually had the person who helped sell that company or the app to IAC at Slator Amsterdam, Patrick Prokush. So he was involved in that deal. So it's interesting. So what's going to happen to those apps if Apple actually makes this a default feature and goes from, now I think they have like 10 languages to 20, 30, 40. So the question really is Apple serious about this, or is it going to be like another stocks app that like people just kind of put into the folder with all the other Apple apps that few people use, right? It does show, though, that Apple is kind of serious about MT, because, we've spoken many times about all these other big tech companies and how they're really pushing into machine translation, or obviously have been driving some of the major developments, but Apple's really been absent. We did pick up some stories or some rumors maybe mid last year, when there were some rumors that they're looking at adding translation capabilities to Siri. And then there was some research paper we picked up on the voice component of machine translation, but so far they've been very quiet, and now they're no longer quiet. Now they're out there and launching that app. So
this app is only text, or is it voice?
It's voice too.
Oh, it's voice too. Okay.
It's voice too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's
the major limitation is the language coverage. So it's 10. Right.
Okay.
But what's impressive is that it's actually on the iPhone, and it's I guess if Apple produces it, it's super native to the iPhone, and it's offline, of course. So that's the big deal, that it's offline.
And, it'll probably just become like the go-to, as in, I have the weather app on my iPhone that I go to look at when I want to know the weather. I've never bothered thinking what other web app what other weather app should I download to find out about the weather? Because it's just there.
So it is that's what I'm saying. It is a long-term threat to all these other guys. And if Apple actually puts some kind of programming muscle behind this and engineering muscle behind this, then, why have 3 translate apps if one comes installed free and is obviously well maintained by Apple? So it really depends on how far Apple wants to push this. All right. So a few sizes further down, we had an interesting story with a company called Localized with an S. They raised $6.5 million in Series A. So why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah. So Localized with an S, yes, as you said. Although apparently they own both domains, I think, don't they?
Good for them. Good for them.
Z and S. So Localized have raised $6.5 million and interesting kind of company. Firstly, I suppose just a little bit about the founders and exec team. So actually, it's kind of got the backing of somebody who I suppose you would call a celebrity entrepreneur. So the guy called Peter Jones is from sort of TV shows like Dragon's Den and American Inventor, I think. So he's on board with Localized as a co-founder. He's also the exec chairman, and he's now been involved in this funding round, along with BGF, which is a UK-based growth fund. So those are the investors in Localized. So the CEO, Chris Green, he comes from outside of the language industry, but he's from a B2C e-commerce background, which kind of fits very much with what Localized does. So he spent sort of 15 years working on cross-border trade platform called Borderfree, which I think was later sold. But that focused on enabling US and UK brands to do business internationally, while the CMO is also a former eBay employee. So they definitely come from sort of an e-commerce type focus background. And what they do now then, so just to tie that together, they sort of build and deploy almost like pre-built websites in the local languages. So they want to help brands expand globally, but feel local. So that would be, for example, helping UK, US, like e-commerce and fashion brands go into, for example, Asian markets, which I think is an area of focus for them, and very much giving them a local look and feel. So obviously
Yeah, so they're not a translation or localization company. They're at heart, they're an e-commerce company that has a strong, localization component to it,
yes.
right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think sort of, what would you call that, sort of ideologically or kind of, they conceptually, I suppose, they think of what they do as localization because they are making content local. But obviously that involves for them a lot more than just the language side. So they're also doing things like merchandising, branding, artwork, currencies, pricing. So making all of that experience for ultimately consumers feel like they're doing it like in a local way. So they got about 40 employees, I think, they say. And like you said, they don't actually do the translation or sort of language, the translation part of the process themselves. They outsource to a third party, but they said they'll continue to evaluate whether that sort of outsource model for translation makes sense as they grow, or as they continue to grow, and as depending on what language pairs they're eventually going to require.
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge. I spoke to the CEO before we wrote the story, and I kind of wanted to drill down more in the language component. So yes, he said that, hey, look, we're working with third-party vendors. We're also looking at MT at some point. Currently, I think they're not using it that much or not at all. But as they grow and scale and have a lot more content to localize, then they're going to get into this. Well, they're going to face the same challenges that translation companies, localization companies face at scale. How do you manage quality? How do you manage feedback cycles? How do you manage updates, etc.? So it's going to be an area of focus for them, the language component, I'm quite sure. And also now they have a fairly restricted focus on Asia so far and certain verticals. As they expand and go into other regions of the world, they're going to have to expand the language coverage too. So language is going to remain a major challenge for them, and probably more so as they grow.
Definitely, as they grow and add languages, as you say. I mean, that's obviously going to be more of a factor.
Yeah. So on the MT side, I think they're using a TMS and some MT. I don't think they're using MT yet. They said they're going to be testing it. So they will be testing to see sort of about new developments, advances, and where they can possibly integrate. But they have a sort of, they have a CMS, content management system, and what they're calling like a localization engine that's AI driven. Yeah, I like when companies from outside the industry are coming into the industry in a sense. I mean, this is a strong move into what many bigger LSPs also provide, kind of this bigger package, not just the language, like all these other ancillary services or tech services around it. And really, they're not connected in a sense to the lock industry yet, because when I checked, like we had like one shared connection.
Okay.
So on LinkedIn, and I have probably a few thousand.
Like I was going to say, it's almost like they're the kind of modern day printers, and we'll talk more about sort of printers later. But when you've got kind of doing a service or having a focus for a specific segment, a customer segment, wanting to do things end to end, and ultimately translation ends up being a part of that.
Oh, that's a good point. I'm not sure if he appreciated the printer analogy.
No, the modern day, it's like a modern day equivalent.
No, I hear you. Yeah.
Bringing content to the masses, distribution.
Right.
There we go.
You're right.
Digital.
Digital, yes. So moving on from the commercial world of Asian e-commerce, mostly, we're going into U.S. federal government contracting. Very, very different worlds. Yeah. So SOSi, that giant US-based federal contractor that do a bunch of language services as well, like, sending people to Iraq, Afghanistan, other war zones to interpret. They bought a minority stake in language tech firm Apptek. Why don't you walk us through that?
Yes. So the arrangement is now that SOS International, as they're called, or SOSi, has become the exclusive reseller of Apptek products to the US federal, state, and local government entities. And also, their president and CEO, Julian Setien, will join Apptek's board of directors. So it turns out actually that these two companies, Apptek and SOSi, are pretty local to each other. So they're both based in Virginia in the US. And they've kind of been in collaboration or collaborating, I suppose, on various projects for like 2 decades, basically, since they both respectively were founded. Like long-standing relationship. They've worked on a few things, I think, for the government even together previously. But yeah, SOSi is definitely sort of government contractor. They do language services, but also a range of other activities like logistics, intelligence analysis, and they generate definitely over $300 million US, they told us, and about 15% of that is language services. They haven't actually said exactly what the revenues are, but just for a kind of indication of scale.
They should probably be a lot bigger. They won some major pieces of work.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot bigger. I think that was their way of saying. So they were basically talking about a category of supplier.
Yeah, so that was like an award.
Inside, there's a threshold. Yeah.
That was like an award they won, and it was in the above 300 million category. Yeah. So, well, if that's all they're telling us, it's hard to find out.
But so language services is still sort of, I suppose, an important component. It's 15% at the moment, approximately, of their revenues. And they work on, I think, a contract that we covered several months back, I think, or maybe even longer ago, is the D-Light contract for the US Department of Defense. It's like a $10 billion contract over 10 years. So they're one of the contractors on that. Apptek then, very different sort of, service, or I guess technology offering, really. Definitely tech focused. They do machine translation technology, as well as automatic speech recognition and natural language processing. Technically, I think typically they're used at the moment within call centers and for media and entertainment customers. And if you remember, I know we covered sort of a few months back the fact that they had Apptek also signed a partnership, or went into partnership with Straker Translations.
And recently also TransPerfect, right?
TransPerfect as well, yeah. And for sort of quite seemingly similar reasons, they were talking about sort of bringing their technology capabilities, Apptek's technology, to media localization services like subtitling, I suppose, and closed captioning in particular.
We should probably invite one of them for a Slater con at some
Apptek
point.
guys?
Apptek, they were always a little bit under the radar, but now they're popping up more and more and more. So
yeah, exactly.
Would like to know more about them. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just pick out a couple of interesting things, actually, because we did do quite an in-depth interview with Julian Setien, who's the CEO and president of SOSi, and he gave us some really good detail about sort of what they're working on and how he sees sort of MT in particular, I suppose, for government working in the US. So he basically told us that the government's interest in sort of these technologies, so speech recognition, machine translation, is really driven by a lack or a shortage of personnel who are basically equipped to deal with the amount of foreign language data that, for example, these agencies are collecting. The volumes have grown, and then therefore, they need to look to automation for particularly sort of understanding purposes. And he gave us a nice quote, which was, "No government agency has the financial or human capital it needs to meet its foreign language needs with humans alone."
Yeah.
There we go.
I guess so. You don't want to.
Guess so. I mean,
you don't want to human translate all of the stuff the American government siphons off in terms of information.
Wait, what? Right? You don't want to? Yeah, no.
You don't want to human translate all of the information they siphon off from those gazillion platforms and digital things. Yeah. So, yeah, very interesting. I mean, minority investment. Something we don't see very often, especially when publicly announced. Both companies are private, so interesting that they would announce it. So it's probably substantial. If it was just a few percent, they probably wouldn't have done it. And yeah, they're located very close to each other. Virginia, it's a lot of defense contractors there. So it makes a lot of sense. Jumping across, I don't know, maybe 12 time zones, 16 time zones to Tokyo, where a financial printer called Takara paid $46 million for an LSP called Simul. What's the full name? I don't recall.
Simul International.
Simul International.
Yes.
And Takara is a financial printer. So that's the world where you and I come from, or we're very familiar with these types of services. So they do all the listing prospectuses, the IPO, shareholder meeting, proxy materials, financial results, Edgar filings in the US, everything that's related to managing managing a public company and doing all the investor relations, and translation is a part of this. And so they paid $46 million for Simul. Simul revenues were $47 million, and they made about $1.2 million in profit. So basically the same type of valuation we're seeing, like one-time revenue, and the profit here 1.2 was kind of after tax. If you did the EBITDA calculation, earnings before all this other stuff, it's probably around maybe 3 to 4 million. So it's again in the 10 to 15 times EBITDA like that we're seeing with some of these other deals. So in terms of pricing, kind of normal, very much in line. And this is actually not the first deal for Takara. They actually acquired a Singapore-based LSP called Translasia, and my favorite Japanese translation company called 10N. I visited their office once. It was.
I was like, why is it your favorite? You're not really allowed to have favorites, are you? But I guess you can.
Well, no, okay. I mean, it's historically was my favorite in previous times. It's
Wasn't it also one of the oldest or sort of largest?
It's the oldest. It's just such a they have such a storied history, and it was just had a lot of good experience there. So 10N in 2019, and they sort of bought both of those, and now they bought Simul. So they're kind of acquiring a fair amount of translation capabilities. Takara, so we looked them up. They're about 190 million in market cap, which is market capitalization. They're also listed in the stock market, quite low actually. So they're kind of like a mini R.R. Donnelley. And this time it goes the other way. So Donnelley sold. That's where you were previously. They sold it to SDL. Yeah. So they sold the translation division to a specialist. A localization translation specialist, and in Japan it goes the other way. The financial printer buys translation capabilities. And well, that deal actually already happened in March 2020. I'm so sorry we missed it. It was Japan. It's a little harder to get some of the information there.
Yeah.
And another fact there is that Simul was actually not a standalone company. They were owned by a company called Benessy Holdings. Benessy is the parent company of Berlitz, the language school that probably most people know. And so why did they buy them? Well, they said one important driver of translation demand within the financial services arena in Japan is that corporate governance code that was introduced in 2015 what is that? Well, Japanese regulators thought, let's translate more, let's be more international, and then make it more transparent for foreign investors to buy Japanese stocks, right? That means more translation. It's going to be as a retail investor in, the US or the European Union, you're probably not going to buy a Japanese stock if you can't read a single document that they're publishing and you have no idea what it is they're doing. But if they translate more, there's probably more interest for those stocks, right? So that was in 2015. And I think the reason why we actually came across this piece of information that they bought Simul was because it was an English language disclosure that they made, which, previous to that corporate governance code probably wouldn't have been published in English.
There you go.
And, we're good at researching, but we're not picking up on Japanese corporate announcements.
Not everything. Not everything and not every time.
Not everything. Some of them we do follow, but it's kind of tough. So long story short, financial printer in Japan buys LSPs, bulks up translation capabilities, and now is probably either the number 1 or number 2 translation provider in Japan, rivaling Honyaku Center, which we discussed a couple pods back. So we'll follow that story. And then we didn't write about this, but we picked up a nice Medium post by the localization manager of Deliveroo. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I think we shouldn't go too much into detail. People should just check it out on Medium.
On Medium,
but it was a transition they made. I like these kind of case studies. We publish some of them. Sometimes the buyers will publish them on Medium. Anything want to share there?
Yes. I mean, so this is basically a case study, as you say, of a localization manager at Deliveroo taking a workflow from being pretty manual, very heavily reliant on engineers, and sort of streamlining that process, really in collaboration or in conjunction, I suppose, with one of their suppliers, or their tech provider, which was Phrase. So she was talking about how she kind of worked with them to get some of the changes that she needed to the system and to push certain content through. I mean, I don't know how much detail we want to go into.
No, I think people should just head over to, our Sweep subscribers got it yesterday in their inbox. We have that service, Slator Sweep, where we're sending out an email every day about, all the stuff that we're coming across.
I was gonna say, I also sent the link to one of my friends who works at a similar kind of company to Deliveroo as a localization manager, and she was like, "This is super helpful. It's the same kind of stuff that I'm dealing with every day." So I'm pretty sure that if anyone's in a kind of localization manager role in any kind of digital tech company, then it's definitely worth a read.
Definitely. And I think Phrase is doing well. So Phrase used to be Phrase app, and they recently rebranded into Phrase, bought the .com domain. So congrats to them. That probably wasn't easy either. I mean, Phrase, natural English, 6-letter domain word, related somewhat to their business. That's a good buy. And I think they're picking up some traction. I think they're based in Hamburg, Germany, but have a few offices elsewhere as well. So good when your buyers are posting favorably about you on Medium. That's nice. That's good content marketing. Free content marketing. All right, let's wrap for today. Thanks for joining again. Thanks for listening in. Don't forget to register for SlatorCon Remote. And catch you next week again. Thanks.
Yep. See you next week. Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye.